Oh yeah, you guys, this is your Google Meet, not
Okay,
ours.
just started.
Yep. Cool. Okay, yeah. So I was going to take you over the tooling that we have, and the processes around it as well. So there's a bit here. So let me know if I'm going too fast and jumping around too much. I might just share my screen. So obviously we've been doing monitoring in AWS for many years, and we've got a lot of learnings, and we're doing it sort of at scale. We would have thousands and thousands of alarms, and typically, we're monitoring the same kinds of resources. So we have sort of standard ways of monitoring certain resources, and it gets to a point where it made sense for us to have some tooling and have things like, well, if we're going to monitor a target group for a load balancer, these are the couple of metrics we want to monitor, and these are the thresholds by default, and this is the classification. And then so we created some tooling around that, not just for setting up the alarms, but also for discovering the resources that we need to alarm. And then also that tooling allows us to have sort of sane, sensible defaults, but also override them so we can tune them over time. Because obviously, although everyone has load balancers, not everyone has the same requirements for how they should be monitored. So I'm just going to share my screen, and I'll take you over the tooling first, I guess, and then the process. So the first tool we have here it's called CFN Guardian. So this was the tool that we developed to be able to manage CloudWatch alarms at scale. So this is actually the second iteration. We had another tool before it, but basically we manage all the alarms in code, so they're all end up being CloudFormation. And this is the tool that has the sort of default templates for every type of CloudWatch alarm that we'd want to create. The way it works is you say, well, I want to monitor this load balancer, and there might be 3 different metrics I want. It might be target response times, like latency and healthy hosts and whatever. And we have, so for each resource, there's a default number of templates for number of alarms, and each alarm has default thresholds. So it means that we don't have to do it over and over, and we can decide on the best defaults once, and we don't have human error. So it's not just that templating engine, but it's also, in addition to the native CloudWatch metrics that we can monitor, we also have some custom metrics that we create. So this tool actually will deploy Lambda functions that can do different types of monitoring as well, like HTTP endpoint monitoring. And there's a bunch of other ones as well. If I have a look, it's actually, I can send you the link to this. It's a public repo, so you can look through it. So we have, for custom checks, we have the HTTP, and then there's a bunch of other ones. We can check if SSL certs are expiring or DNS is expiring. There's some sort of old school ones, NRPE. You can run like a client on a server and run any custom check and get the response and push a metric to CloudWatch. We have some other ones, sort of database and that. But the main one we do, so the custom one, is HTTP. So those are Lambdas that can then hit public endpoints, but they can also be deployed in VPCs and hit internal endpoints. And there's a bunch of different options for that, where we can set, you can see here, the endpoint you try to hit, the status code you expect to get. There's a bunch of things like SSL, true or false, or compressed. We can look for body regexes. We can change the headers. We can set the user agent. And I mean, it's obviously our own thing, so we keep adding features to it. So this is obviously very helpful for checking HTTP endpoints, both public and private. Auth can be difficult, but there's ways around that. But the bulk of the monitoring, when you're using a lot of native services, are just the standard alarms. So look at resources. These are the standard kind of Amazon resources that we have default templates for, and obviously we're adding new ones all the time. And it makes it easy to configure because you basically just put the unique identifier, and the tool knows how to then go generate the CloudWatch alarms based on that. So I can show you here, this is an example in your prod account where we have Guardian deployed. The way we deploy it is actually, it's in code commit in the account, and there's a pipeline that goes along with it. So this way, all the config is in code. You go and make the change here, it kicks off the pipeline, generates the CloudFormation, and then deploys that CloudFormation. So you can see here's the stack. So that way we're tracking all the config for the monitoring in code. And obviously we have the advantages of that. We can see there's a history there. You can see here we're setting, there's 4 different SNS topics that we associate with the different types of alarms, and I'll get to this in a second. So these are the these can be changed, obviously, but these are the ones that are integrated with our Opsgenie. And here you can see we're setting, creating some based off, we're kind of inheriting default templates, and then we're overriding certain attributes. That's what the sort of templating engine allows you to do. And then you can see here, so these templates are based on the default ones, that are inheriting them and then changing one thing. So this single network target group, that it's using this base, it's that class, and then it's by default, I think healthy host is set to 2. This is obviously, we want to do a single, so we set the threshold to 1. But then the rest of it obviously is all based on the default template. And then here you can see the list of the resources. So then the tricky part is actually generating this config. So, because that's kind of annoying. To do that, we wrote another tool, which is called CFN, it's called Monitorable. You basically run this in an account and it will generate that template to make it easier. And I have an example. So this is the tool here that you run. It searches every region for every resource that we know about. And then you can see it basically, when it finds the resources, it sort of collects them all, and then it'll output in the CFN Guardian syntax. And then we just decide what we want to actually monitor and what we don't want to monitor. So that's just to help us set the config. So those are all the resources in your prod account that our tool knows about. Any questions so far? No. Cool. So then that creates the alarms. Obviously, they're all created with CloudFormation based on those standard templates. There are certain things that we then extract from the alarms, because when the alarm goes off, it goes to the SNS topic through to our Opsgenie, and then in our Opsgenie we can kind of extract some sort of metadata. There's a limited amount of stuff you can get from the CloudWatch alarm, but we get what we can to make it easier. So when we get the alarm, the team knows what it is and they can respond quickly. One thing that's really important that we've noticed when you guys have created manually alarms is you've created an alarm for the alarm state, but not for the OK state. So that's the kind of thing that's really important, where the way that we do monitoring, we always have an action for when it recovers. So our process within the team is we never go and close an alarm in Opsgenie. We address the issue, and then the CloudWatch alarm resolves and it sends another notification to Opsgenie. That's the kind of thing where it's, like depending on how you're responding, if you're just getting an SMS message that there's an issue and then you go and fix it, you might not necessarily want to know that it recovered because you confirmed it yourself. But our process is, we have the alarm stays open until it automatically recovers based on the CloudWatch recovery, and we never go and close an alarm. So that's the kind of thing where the team gets really confused because they've fixed the issue, but the alarm hasn't closed. So just an example here of an alarm that's come through to our Opsgenie. You can see how we sort of enrich the payload, and we add some meaningful sort of metadata around the alarm, things like the link. So if I click on this, it takes me straight to CloudWatch. Our tool for responding gaining access to the accounts is Elma. So we have the command that we just need to run to quickly get into your account so we can investigate it. And then this is all fairly standard stuff for us. So the naming is healthy hosts. We have obviously processes or how we investigate that type of alarm and how we respond to that. So something else we have then is a process around problems. So if we have an issue where we're getting certain alerts for a certain resource and there's a known issue, we have problem records. So in Confluence, we have a template. And other than sort of, documenting what the problem is and what the short-term process is to go and like a playbook basically to resolve the incident while we're working on the underlying problem and heading towards resolution. We have some tooling around, we actually put the alarms in here, and then we have a tool that when an alarm comes through to Opsgenie, it fires a webhook to this tool, and then it checks if we have any problem pages about it, and then it'll send us a message in Slack. So instead of us having to go and look, are there any problem records, it tells us straight away, hey, there's a problem record for this and you should follow the process. But it relies on obviously that alarm name being in a certain format. that we add in here. And then, we have different ways of treating it depending on the status of the problem. So if we're still investigating it, or if it's a known issue, and obviously we're always heading towards resolving the issue. We don't want to just be getting alerts every day for the same thing for years.
So this link turns up in Opsgenie, not in the Slack alarm?
This is just an internal thing. So if once we find a new problem, when we create a problem record, we put the alarm into this table here. If that alarm comes in again, Opsgenie fires a webhook. It matches the alarm in Opsgenie to the alarm here, and we have our own internal Slack channel that then has all these problem records that says, hey, there's a problem record for this alarm, and then the team knows. So, and it helps obviously because we've got a global team. If we have something here, we put it together in the Australian team, then the guys on the other side of the world that didn't know about it, they just get the message and it has all the information about what to go and do.
Yeah, I was just wondering if that's available to us.
No, not at the moment. It's just an internal thing. So the other thing I want to talk about was just the way we do the classification. So those, because that's pretty important here. These 4 different SNS topics: critical, warning, task, and then Slack, or really info. What does that mean? So all our alarms, there are defaults for whether it's the alarm action, a warning, or a crit, or a task, and then you can override them. So we sometimes do that if it's, we work with the customer. If it's, this thing is actually not that critical, we'll override it to make it a warning. So, yeah. So basically, when we have an alarm, how we decide on the classification, if it's something, sometimes you might want to know about something, but there's nothing we can do about it, but we can still have some monitoring for it. So that's basically, if we're not going to ever do anything about it, then it's an info, and it might just go to Slack. And it might be something that's not infrastructure related, it's application, or it might just be something, where you just want to see what's going on, just see some activity, but there's nothing for us to do. Because the way that we do monitoring base 2 is basically, if we get an alert, we should be taking some action. If we're not taking action, then why are we getting the alert? That's our philosophy around monitoring. So if there's nothing for us to do, then that's fine. It might just be sort of an info, and it can go to Slack. If there is something for us to do, something we can help with, then is it sort of like a preventative early warning type of alert that might not necessarily require action? If it doesn't definitely require the action, then it might be a warn. So that might be, we've designed the environments to be fault tolerant. They might self-heal. It might just be a one-off issue where, one instance in an autoscaling group sort of cycled and it comes through as a warn, but a minute later it resolves. There's nothing really for us to do then because there's no service impact. But we still kind of want to track it. And sometimes it might be, if something stays in a warn for a long period, there might be an issue. So a good example is the number of healthy hosts. You need to have a number of healthy hosts in the target group to be able to serve your the load for the application. So you might want to have a minimum of 2 or 3 or whatever. So that would be a critical. Whereas if you have just one unhealthy host out of 10 for a short period, then maybe that's just a warning because there's no service impact. But if it stays like that, for a day, and then you lose another one, you kind of want to know that there's unhealthy hosts if they last for a certain period. So the warnings are alerts that don't come to us. We go to them. So we do review them every day, a couple of times a day. So pretty much every shift we'll review all the warnings. And then we run reporting as well once a week to try and find sort of trends. So if something is happening, a couple of times every day, there's no service impact, but there's, a task is cycling or something like that, you kind of want to know about it. So you want to address it, but we do it based on sort of reporting of the warnings. So the next one is, we know that some action has to be taken, but it doesn't have to be taken immediately or not. If it's something that can wait, this is, certainly when we get alerts on the weekend or at night, does it have to happen right now, or can we do it the next day? And can it even be done right now? So good examples would be disk alerts. When you hit 80% or something, you don't necessarily have to have a crit fire off because you don't have to solve it right now. You could solve it tomorrow. And you might not be able to solve it right now because we can't necessarily fix the issue of pruning the database or whatever. We need to work with someone. So that would create a task which actually creates a ticket, and Zendesk is assigned to someone. It can't sort of be forgotten. It's not like it's something that's trending in the wrong direction. It doesn't just, it's in a bad state and then recovers. It's bad and it's getting worse. It's running out of disk, or like a certificate expiring in a certain amount of time. It's not an issue right now, but it will be in a week if we don't do anything about it. So those are tasks. And then if it's something that has to happen right now, then obviously that's the easiest one to understand. That goes to us 24/7. That'll be acknowledged within a certain period. Otherwise, it escalates. We can't really miss it. But the expectation, I guess, with crits is that it's something that can't wait. It needs to be resolved right now. We have to address the issue. It'll recover. It's important enough that if we can't fix it, someone wants to be called in the middle of the night and, woken up. And it's the kind of thing where we have to be taking some action to address the incident, but we also want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So we don't want to get the same crit day after day. There's some action taken to address the underlying problem as well. That's the expectation, I guess, from our side. Any questions on those classifications? No. So within SNS, those were these SNS topics, the monitoring ones. They're sort of mostly to do with the environments. There's one extra there that's an event one. But then the other bunch here are the account monitoring ones, which are more about not so much application environments or your resources. It's more about account stuff like service limits. We have those. They come through as tasks. So you're running out of a limit for a certain resource, or the AWS health events. So like Amazon tells you that an EC2 instance is going to be retired. We capture those. It's more sort of account-based stuff, or security monitoring. There's a guard duty alert, that kind of stuff. So that comes through, and that comes through the account monitoring, and this is managed by beers, whereas this monitoring here is all the Guardian stuff. So I guess the next point is, how do we work together to make sure that when you have new resources, that we're actually monitoring them? So because I think that's the issue, where we deploy monitoring at one point in time, and it's maybe right at that point in time, and then things change. So there's two sides to that. One is you can tell us about it, and we can work together to add the monitoring for it. We're also adding some new tooling around sort of doing regular audits of what's in the account, which I can show you here as well. So this is a tool that we're working on at the moment, which we plan to sort of run every day. It works off inspecting all the CloudWatch metrics for the last 3 hours, so all the active resources. And then we have classifications for every type of metric and dimension, where we decide whether these resources should be monitored, and then sort of check to see if there's an alarm monitoring those dimensions. So you can see here, there's a bunch of resources in the prod account, and then whether, you can't see this, can you? Hang on. Sorry, I don't think you saw what I showed you earlier either. So this was when I was talking about monitorable.
Yeah, I didn't see any of that.
Yeah, so this was the monitorable tool when we scan the account and then generate the config. Someone should have stopped me. So you can see running this, scans every region, finds all the resources. You can see when it finds resources, and then it outputs the CFN Guardian config, which we then put in code commit. And then this is the other tooling where we're scanning the whole prod account, every region, finding all the metrics from the last 3 hours, deciding if there are things that we should be monitoring or not, and then checking to see if there is an alarm for that. You can see on the right side, I know that's small, but if there's alarms, true or false, and on the left, there's a classification, which is sort of our opinion on whether that, we've addressed basically every metric there is, and whether we should be monitoring that or not. So you can see there's those are the requireds, the optionals, and then we have a bunch of ignores. And you can see that there's a lot that could be monitored. So that's the hardest part, is working out of all the metrics you've got, which one should we actually be alarming? and then going to alarm them.
How does that work with, like, if we're going to put that as part of the CI/CD process or something to generate this? How would you mark those ones that are required, and the ones that we say no, they're not required, they don't keep coming back in, or any of the changes that get made doesn't keep coming back in?
Yeah, so this is one of the hardest things, is how you can add, obviously you can add your monitoring with your infrastructure code. We've always wanted to decouple it, because we don't want a situation where you make a change, you accidentally delete a resource, and it deletes the monitoring that goes with it, and then you don't know about it. So we've always thought it was good to decouple it, but it adds that extra burden of, well, now I add something, I have to go and add it to the monitoring. And so what we're trying to go for here is, if this runs every day and finds everything, and then it basically keeps state and goes, well, there's a new thing here that isn't monitored, then we would talk to you about it. Yeah, this is mostly for this type of monitoring for us is the production monitoring. There's obviously a good use case for just monitoring in non-prod environments, but that's sort of, maybe that kind of monitoring can go with the code. Like, that's fine to have it, so that maybe it deploys its own monitoring, and that goes to you and it doesn't go to us. But then when it gets to production, it's the sort of decoupled monitoring.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with sort of doubling up on some of that stuff. And this is really about trying to make sure that in production, hopefully, I know you're moving fast, but because we have this tooling to be able to add the monitoring quickly, it shouldn't be that hard to go and add. Or we deploy a new service and then we find, oh, there's a new service, do you want us to monitor it? We have easy ways to generate the code, the templates, and then we just throw them in. And then this is keeping track of making sure basically we have coverage. And we can sort of agree, you can see it as well because it's in code commit, so you can see all the config there. But yeah, it's really, it shouldn't be too hard. If you say, hey, we want to monitor something, we can just have a discussion and we can work together on what the monitoring should look like. And it shouldn't be hard for us to go and add it for you. So I guess that's the one thing. I know I've spoken to a couple of people in the team that have been creating the monitoring and assigning it to our SNS topic. I think it'd probably be better if you spoke to us and we did it for you, or we spoke about it together. And you might want to do some of your own monitoring too and go to you, but it's just, if it's coming to us, we kind of have to do it this way so that we can, because we have this process around it.
Is there you mentioned when a message is sent to that topic, is there an interface that we can subscribe to so that we can generate the alarms in a format that would work for you?
So yeah, I guess the other part is, so this SNS topic here, you can see this is our opportunity, and then they'll go into the opportunity with our integration and go through that flow. There's nothing wrong with you also subscribing to it like you have here, so tapping off it. And then everything.
No, I mean actually feeding our custom alarms into your alerting process. So you mentioned there was, you had all that alarm detail, excuse me, event detail, and there were a bunch of standard stuff that you needed for it to integrate with Opsgenie. I wonder if it's possible for us to, implement that contract so we can write. I guess where I'm coming from is, if we write a new application, we want to have the developers using CDK write custom metrics.
Yep.
That, forcing people to think about it up front. So if there's a custom metric on, say, DTI, which is a process we've got here, and if it hasn't processed a file within a certain amount of hours, then that's an alarm situation, a critical alarm.
Yep.
At the moment, we can only, how could we get that into Opsgenie?
Yeah, sure. So we're talking a lot about the Amazon metrics, but the Guardian is basically just a templating engine, and it can do alarms for any type of metrics, custom metrics included. And for example, the HTTP ones, these are generated by the Lambdas that are deployed with Guardian. So it does the two parts. It generates the thing that creates the metrics, which is the Lambda that hits the endpoint, and then posts the metrics to CloudWatch metrics, right? And then the second part of it is it creates the CloudWatch alarm based off a template to then go and alert based on these metrics. So Guardian can be used to create the alarm even if it's not creating the metrics. So you can create whatever custom metrics you want, and then you can still use the Guardian template to go and create custom metric alarms. I think that was in the.
Yeah, I think maybe a philosophical debate where you're saying that the alarm, the monitoring is separate from the code.
Well, it's still, yeah, separate. So, but what you can do is you can create a template, a standard template like this, and so you can see here you can do whatever you need. So this is for any type of custom metric, and you give it a name, and then in the same, in that code commit repo, you then reference that template, and then you list all the resources. So if you had a certain type of custom metric that you want to add, you'd have to do this work once to decide, well, what's the alarming going to look like, and then it's kind of easier because then you just list all the resources as you add them. So the template being up here, these are kind of, this example was inheriting, but you can do the whole thing. You can create a new template in this code, and then you just list under that template all the resources. So I imagine, you'd only have a certain number of types of custom metrics you'd want to alarm in a certain way. You would create the template once, and then as you deploy more resources. So it basically,
I guess my concern is that they are in two separate places.
It's not with the application.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, so you're saying you want things.
So is there a way that we can create the metrics and the alarms in our application code essentially as part of our CDK stack, and send a message to that SNS topic, but give you all the details that you need to work with your.
Yeah. So one of the other reasons we like the decoupled is that we can make changes to this at any point without doing an application deployment or an application infrastructure deployment. We found in the past that was the issue. It's nice to have it, tightly coupled because it's easy for automation. But what if we want to go and change the threshold? We can't go do a deployment of your app. And even you would have to go and do a deployment, right? Whereas we want to change the monitoring. So that was another reason to decouple it. And we really need to be able to change the monitoring. We can't wait for your next deployment in 2 weeks' time and then just deal with the noise. You know what I mean? Otherwise, you end up just manually making those changes. So that's the other issue. And we need that control because you notice all the time what the guys will say, hey, we're getting this alert. Is this right? Can we change the threshold? Because we really can't have the noise. Otherwise, it's the boy who cried wolf. And then, you guys know what it's like to have too much noise, right? With the monitoring, it just means none of it's useful. So we spend a lot of time making sure we don't have the noise, and then making sure that we can change those thresholds easily. So that's the difficult part, is if we don't have control over it. So
how does that work with the automated? So you've got that tool that automates this this file. How do those custom things work with that? Is that just addition to? Does it include them as well?
So that tool is just around the native metrics. It's a helper. The custom ones, you have to be familiar with the syntax and do it yourself. And so we have the documentation here. So the team
would be separate. It would be separate to the default stack. It would just be live on its own kind of thing.
You can actually break it out. It doesn't all need to be in the one file.
Yeah, right.
So you could do that. You can actually. This tooling can be used. Obviously, you can get into a bit of trouble if this is done wrong. So like we do most of it ourselves, but you can also, there's no reason, this is in your account. You have access to make these changes. Obviously you have to be familiar with it, but there's no reason why you couldn't have a separate one. It's just, we have that trouble where even if everything was done properly, but there's no context around it, if you create an alert and went to the team and they're like, it's a custom thing, they wouldn't know what to do. So that's the other problem as well, is even if we did that, we'd have to have some handover, we'd have some documentation. Maybe it's, one of those problem records where we have a playbook. We just need to be a bit more organized. So we'd need to be involved anyway, even if we weren't doing the config, we'd need to have a bit of a handover. I guess that's what you're getting at, Matt, right? Like if you want to do it, but then hand over the process.
No, what I'm getting at is just the fact that they are separate. Means that we have to go and maintain this in all our environments, I assume. So we're as a developer, I would create a new service, and hopefully during the time that I'm creating that service, I'd be thinking about what sort of alarms and alerts should be relevant for it. And I should be able to deploy those alarms and alerts along alongside the code and test them in my test environment and make sure that they do trigger when they're expected and they don't trigger when they're not expected to. And that, it travels with the code, gets deployed through to production, and it's actually part of the life cycle. But what I'm seeing here is this kind of works in production.
Yeah, so when it gets
to and they're separate, and I can just see that development teams are going to deploy this service and go, yep, all good. Probably not even going to think about this stuff, and it's always just going to be a problem.
I guess some monitoring should probably be going to the developers, right? Like maybe it shouldn't be going to base 2. So I still think there's a good use case for doing monitoring that way, but it doesn't go through our SNS topics. Because what are we doing? When it gets that custom, it's like, what value are we providing? We're just sort of calling the developer anyway. It should just go straight to the person that can do something about it. Because what would the playbook be? What would happen? What's an example of one where it should go to base 2?
Yeah, I mean, there needs to be that sort of handover, obviously, as well, to say, if you get this alarm, then this is what we expect you guys to do at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, and some of that stuff maybe, because we're not a call desk that the value is just in getting the alert and then making a phone call. You may as well just send it directly to whoever should be receiving it in the first place. I guess that's our view on that. I guess we need to think about an actual example of one of those.
I guess it would be like a case by case thing. If it's something that is fixable without having to touch the code or do something like that, have that in-depth knowledge, then it makes sense. But if it's something that devs have to get involved in, then that's what I mean.
Yeah, and often I think we're sort of monitoring, the service is down, but there might be additional monitoring that would then provide context as well. Like, this is the reason that the service is down. So, we might know that it's not returning at 200, but you might have additional monitoring on, why that service is failing. I know it's harder for sort of those, the services that are sort of batch processing and stuff like that. It's easier when it's just
we don't want any of them anymore anyway.
Yeah, I mean, like the web services are easier, right? It's like something's failing the health check.
Yeah, I guess the solution there is we have our monitoring, and then so custom metrics and stuff that we'll create, and for the things that we want base 2 to get involved with, that's where this tool comes in. So it's not for everything.
Yeah, and what you were talking about before with having through the environments, I mean, you can still have the fact that it creates the custom metrics in every environment that can be, with that, the application code and the infrastructure code. But then, and even the alarming of that, and then when it gets to production, you could have that alarming, but then we could have, for some of them, additional alarming that's sort of our alarming. I don't think it needs to be an or, it can be an and. So you already have it right through for yourself, but then once it hits production, then it's kind of the decoupled one. And
I guess that's the interface that says here are the ones that we want base 2 to action.
Yeah, I mean, it needs to be handed over anyway at that point. So the process is that this is how we deal with it. This is what it is how we deal with it. And then we go and add it in to our monitoring. Anything else there?
No, all good.
So one of the things we wanted to work on earlier in the year was adding a lot more of the HTTP endpoint monitoring. And we kind of got stuck with that. So that's certainly one area that we think for a lot of customers is really valuable, not just for the external, but the internal. I don't know if that's something you think would be helpful to work on as a next step.
Yeah, I know we've got an issue with what's that machine that keeps running out of memory, the EN the count stuff, I think, where it runs out of memory, but the health check keeps saying that it's healthy, but actually it's not. And I think because it's just downloading something like a favorite icon or something, and it's not actually hitting the endpoint, there's no kind of more kind of thorough check, I guess, of that endpoint's health.
Is that a
does
a
healthy
container?
just mean lights on, like send a ping, get a response, or does health include all of the attributes underneath, CPU, memory, disk, etc.?
So if we were doing like a web service that's running in ECS, we would have generally monitoring, and it's behind a load balancer. We would have monitoring on the target group to see, healthy host. So that's just that it's healthy on the load balance health check. But then also,
But
but
that's what I meant. When for a health check, is that just saying
for a load balancer health check?
Yeah, send a ping, got response, therefore.
Well, for the application load balancers, then it's layer 7, it's HTTP, and it's expecting a certain status code within a certain time. And then you have to decide on what that path is, and how deep you're going. So you could just say, well, the service is up, but all the services behind it are down. That's the hard thing to decide is, do I want this to fail? Because, it'll cycle the task. Do you cycle the task when the database is unavailable because the health check checks the database and there's no value there? Or, do you just check, well, the service is up, everything behind it's down, but it's not my problem. So then it's healthy in the load balancer, but then you still have the HTTP monitoring, which actually hits an endpoint, and then that goes off because it can't hit the database. So your health check for HTTP will often go a lot deeper, and there's an issue, but you're not cycling the containers or the instances unnecessarily because there's nothing wrong with them. It's something below that. So that's why it often helps to have the HTTP one that's like a deep check, and then the load balancer one, just to make sure, because it's an easy one, should be healthy host in the load balancer. But then you can also do, if it's ECS, we've got the ones for ECS service, so it can check things like CPU and memory of the service, or if the service is even running. Like if you've got 0 tasks in a service, you might want to know about that. You can do it for the whole cluster to make sure the cluster's not out of memory and it can't load, can't spin up new tasks. Or if it's EC2, then we've got if it's an auto scaling group, there's CPU and status check. And then if you want to get deeper for them, like memory is a difficult one because on EC2, you can't see that from the outside, the hypervisor. So you need to install the EC2 CloudWatch agent, and then they get pushed through as custom metrics. And then we've got templates for those custom metrics that are like memory on EC2. So Steve, I don't know, you're talking about that one, the memory one. Is that for a container in ECS, or was that for EC2?
That was just EC2. I was wondering how this HTTP thing would work with that as well, but I think you've answered that.
Yeah. But then, so there's the standard. I don't know if you're using the CloudWatch agent. Don't seem, but there's an agent for both Windows and Linux that Amazon provides that you can install on the operating system, and then it pushes metrics through, kind of like the ECS container insights one, but for EC2. And then it pushes things like CPU and memory and other things you might want to do, and then you can add a template for that. So like there's a combination of, like, we mostly care about the application if it's down, but then obviously it's helpful to have infrastructure monitoring too. It's more of a preventative. And obviously, this list here is quite long, and it's the kind of thing we can go through and look at all these ones that are false. Would that be useful for this one here to be, monitoring the ECS service and, whatever else? Like, what are these? Elasticsearch. So there's a bunch of Elasticsearch clusters that don't seem to have any monitoring. All these ones.
Yeah, if they go down.
If they go down, are you in trouble? Because we should probably add some monitoring there. And we have standard templates for that. So, for example,
in fact, logs-new-v5 is down at the moment.
Is it? Yeah. So if we had monitoring on that.
And Michael is away for 2 days. So
I don't know where if we look under, I think it's under.
We also need to work on those even now you do get alarms for some things that are legitimate, and I don't think you have any of those documents that tell you what to do, the run sheet or whatever they were.
Yeah, for and the idea of those are mostly around like an issue that we're working to resolve, right? Like it's not just, we do have one status for it's accepted, but we want to have as few of those as possible. We want to help you by sort of pressuring you to make sure that we're not just living with stuff as well. So it's the main reason for that.
Unfortunately, our platform is in such a state that there are constant legitimate issues going on, but the solutions aren't short term.
Yeah,
they're months away to actually solve them. So,
right,
it's going to be complicated because there'll be it's a threshold that we're willing to accept, that we have to accept, but there'll be a point where it kind of tips over the edge and things are broken. But then I don't know if there's ever a situation where there's a simple run sheet we can give you that says just restart this service kind of thing. It always gets escalated to people here.
Yeah, I mean, we do that, and then the idea would be that knowing that it's going to be addressed at some point, because the one, if we look here, investigating is really where like we don't know what the problem is, and then the idea is every time it comes in, it's not just to fix the incident, like there might be a what to do, but then we want to log the investigation and actually keep a trail of, this time I saw this, and maybe next time look for this, and we'll add some extra logging. But I'm assuming, so you're saying that there's a bunch of them that's going to be in this state for a long time, the fixing state.
Yeah, one of our biggest is, one was the DDoS. So I know that maybe we could do something around that. That there are a couple of metrics that if we get a lot of hits on our login page, that's usually an indication that we're getting DDoS'd, and that's probably where you guys could help quite a bit.
Yep.
We've got some automation around that, but
so that might be all right at the moment. I think what might be a good example of either that one or the one above, fixing, or I can't see what it says under
investigating.
Comment, but, we're not investigating. So I'm not sure. We have memory leaks on our web servers, and we know that there's memory leaks. We don't know why. We don't know what's causing them, and so at the moment we just have a weekly restart scheduled because Microsoft seems to like.
That's the Band-Aid fix.
Yeah. So
which is better than nothing.
Well, yeah, I wouldn't call it implementing a fix. We don't really know the root. We know the root cause of why is the outage. Why does it crash? Because of memory leak. How are we fixing it? Through regular restarts. But in terms of what's causing the memory leak, don't know yet. We're not investigating it, but sooner or later we should.
So, and that kind of thing, generally a memory leak, that's going to be back. We're not going to be able to help that much. It's going to be back to developers. But that's the thing. Once if you're investigating and you have sort of how to address the incident, we have a process of what to do. You get to a certain point where it's like, well, we could automate. I mean, you can either fix the underlying problem with a new design, but even if you've got a standard playbook, can you then go and automate that? Because why not? So that's like if the process was to go and restart, you've done that. You've put in automated restarts. So that's kind of automating the playbook. You haven't addressed the problem, but you've at a certain point,
but they're not smart either. It's not saying if you reach 70% restart, it's just saying every Tuesday.
Schedule, yeah. And we have that for some customers as well. Like you can do it in auto scaling groups. You can do scheduled, terminate an instance after a week. And it's not great, but it's better than nothing. And it saves people time. But and you can kind of halfway go as well. Like we do that. If the process takes some time, you can automate it, but not automate the trigger so that you just go and run a job or something that goes and does it. And then sometimes we'll work, with customers to automate that process, but give it back to the customer. So there's this thing that has to happen. We want it to be kicked off manually, but the actual process can be automated. So create a Jenkins job that someone goes and runs. It's better if it's hands off, obviously. That's just a spectrum. But I imagine you would, yeah, it sounds like you would be tracking this kind of stuff internally as well when it's, it's application related, and you've just got a whole list of known issues that you kind of have on the back burner because you've got more important things.
Yeah, so probably the Elasticsearch ones, clusters. It'd be good to get some alarms around that, because we got one that if they do break, production goes down, and we've got one that's in red right now. Luckily, it's the log one. So that
you're saying the cluster health is red.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Somebody at some stage had set up an
that?
alarm in New Relic, and it's alarming.
Right. Yeah.
So, and there's no, like you said, there's no Guardian alarms on that. It would be good to get those on, because that's something that you guys could immediately help with. Like if those clusters go down, then it's infrastructure, right? Probably know how to resolve
we at least want to know about it, right, and get you guys involved. There's some things we need to work, because depending on how you've got it set up, like it'll always give, I don't know, are they always green? Because you can have, if there's only one node, it's always yellow, and if there's not enough replicas for the shards or something, So yeah, but either way, we can obviously change that threshold, and at the very least say alert if it's red. Yeah, so we can go ahead and do that. We can, in the next week, put together a list of all the things, additional monitoring like that we've sort of identified that you don't have that's the easy stuff, I guess, the Amazon metrics. And then, yeah, it's more the custom stuff like the HTTP, if that's useful, if we can work together on endpoints there.
We've got, for example, this morning, Dave, I don't know if you noticed, we've got an alarm on one of the dead letter queues. So Michael is away today, so he would normally action that.
Didn't see it.
Yeah, so there's an alarm on that, and I've basically can help with that, because the workaround is to replay those.
Yeah. However, on that one, he's actually created a Jenkins job where you just pick the queue and click a button.
Yeah, that's that kind of semi-automated playbook thing.
He might have even sent me instructions on how to do it.
Yeah, but that's potentially something Page 2 could action. Right?
What's the root cause of that, though? Like, is that the search thing, or
various?
So
application errors, intermittent problems, database timeouts.
We have a different issue. As soon as you unpack that piece, we have a different problem, which is if a downstream system was unavailable and, like Matt said, times out, replaying is great. They then go through. If they've gone into DLQ because there's an actual application error, that error needs to then get looked at. I don't think we're even doing that. So we just keep hitting replay and just hope sooner or later it goes away.
It does after 14 days, because they get purged after 14
exactly.
days.
So if there is an actual issue, we're not even looking at. Yeah,
but even the replay, if Michael's away, not any developer, not anyone should have access to those jobs to replay those messages, I assume. But they could potentially help with that.
But well, yeah, and that particular one, the way he's done it is great, although it's prone to user error, because I think you select the queue, the DLQ you want to read off, and then you select the queue you want to put on. So it's possible you put them on completely the wrong queue.
You kind of want a mapping where you have to make that decision.
Yeah, it should be almost hard coded in the back. If it's coming off this, it has to go onto that.
The thing is that you keep going further and further. You go do that, and then you go, well, if there's anything there, just do it. And then all of a sudden, you've got this band-aid fix that's fully automated.
But it's supposed to be built in anyway. I thought there's a whole back off retry process in.
But that's what I mean. Like it's obviously retried, and then failed and gone in a dead letter queue. And by building this retry mechanism, I guess that's the thing. Like looking at the root cause, and if it's, for example, because I think that one actually goes into this log, and that might be why it's failing, because the search is red, and so you'd have to fix that, and then you can replay.
Yeah. It's a hard thing because if you're going, well, it goes into letter queue, let's just try again. We'll just change the settings to try more times before it gets there. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I think that's the problem myself. I think the config setup, it's a one try and.
Well, the thing is, Dave, nobody's looking at that. So.
Oh yeah, totally agree.
So we're at band-aid stage. We want to get to proper fix stage, but that's not happening. So we'll be at band-aid stage until that's the case. And the problem is, when Michael Wheeligan's away, which he is today and tomorrow, that doesn't get addressed. Yeah. So, you know, what do you want to do? We want to fix the problem, but nobody's looking at it.
Yeah. SQS is a good example of one where it's like, you know, like we have that tool just to find stuff, but we don't. Healthy hosts in a load balance is easy. There should be healthy hosts. But SQS, it's like, it depends on the app. Is it okay for there to be messages there for an hour? I don't know. Yeah. So that's one where we definitely, it's like, well, we have to talk to whoever understands what happens with that queue before we go and do it. We can't just go, oh, monitor every SQS queue, because it's just going to be noisy for no reason. So
yeah, no, but these are very specific examples of where we get this count. Somebody needs to go in and manually click a button.
Yep.
And if the person who does that normally is away, then it doesn't happen. So
yeah, and we can do things like,
you guys could help with that. So there's a very specific example.
Yeah, we can have some monitoring where it's like, you know, someone from your organization should be taking some action, but we're monitoring the fact that that hasn't happened. So it's kind of delayed, you know, like it's been in the bad state for an hour, which means someone's either not in or dropped the ball or whatever. So we could do that as well. If it's usually, you know, you have someone taking care of it, but we're sort of monitoring the fact that that process has failed instead of being the first point of call. I'm just worried, like we can't take on too much, right? Like we can't, the team can't just be nonstop running. If all our customers did that, like we just couldn't, it wouldn't work. And we really do need to push for that, because the other thing is there needs to be some pain on, you know, the people that should be fixing the problem. Because otherwise, you know, why would you fix it if there's always just this free service to go and run the workaround for you? You know what I mean? There's no incentive. But yeah, certainly, as long as we're working towards fixing it and addressing the issue, we can go and add any of that kind of monitoring. I don't know, Matt, if you have a whole bunch, if you put together a list, I guess, if it sounds like you know a bunch of things that are current issues, and then we can work together to work out what would be sensible monitoring, and we can implement it along with the process. And then we can start with that. And then if things kind of get out of hand, then we just have a conversation.
So I'm just conscious of the time because we've overrun. So is that the action to go away? So Jared, that script that you ran, is it worth sending that across to Matt and Stephen to review of anything that's false there, as in not monitored, to identify things that should be monitored, plus any additionals?
Yeah, would this be useful to look through? It's kind of hard to get this view from the console of everything. It's also, I mean, like, yeah, this doesn't have the metrics. It's only got the dimensions. So I don't know if it'd be valuable or not.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can look
Would you
through
rather
what needs to be added. Definitely, would be critical.
Yeah, I mean, I guess even if you just started with, because obviously this classification here, this is just our opinion on what required and optional. These are so generally things. It's like if you have a database in the prod account, there should be monitoring, some kind of monitoring on it. So that kind of thing. So if you could, any of the ones here that are false, if you could say, well, that's not an issue, we don't need to monitor that resource at all. But you know, I guess like the Elasticsearch ones, it sounds like we should be monitoring it. So if I just gave you the list of just the ones we've got as required to start with, maybe you just go through that and then say, yeah, these ones should be monitored, and then we can talk about how we monitor them.
Yeah, I'd take it from a perspective of what problems do we have now, and what could you guys help with? Elasticsearch, it's definitely.
Yep.
I'm assuming that's something you can help with, right? Like,
Yeah.
Look at those clusters and say, you guys, if there's an issue with those, you can probably help.
Yep.
By investigating what the
That's
cause is.
I think that's the easy thing. Any of Amazon's monitoring standard metrics, like especially for a managed service, then that's certainly something we can help when we have experience, and we definitely want to know about it. Yep. All right, so I'll send this through. Maybe I'll cut it down to even just the required ones that don't have alarms, and then to Matt and Steve, and then Matt, if you come up also with a list of these are the issues you're having, so from the other side, and then we can work out what kind of monitoring would be best to catch that.
Right.
Yep. All right.
Cool. I've actually got to drop off because I've got 11:30. Could I ask a favor, Dave? If it's you that gets this recording, could you shoot that through to me, please? Meeting recording.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I was quite impressed with Jared's monitoring review there, end to end.
Yeah, it looked great.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys. I've got to drop.
Thanks.
Okay.
See you.
Thank
Bye.
Thank you.
See ya.
So, yeah.
Yeah.